And information I wish I knew a lot earlier in life. Just a little bit about me. I come from a medical background. Professional financial services was not my background. I worked in medical for 20 years, working 10, 12 hours a day. And yet I still found myself living paycheck to paycheck. The more I earned, the more I spent. I just couldn't figure out how to get ahead financially. As a single mom, I struggled to provide for my children. And while they are grown now, I still felt that this was the right place for me to be, that I can help them out and put them in a little better, situation than I had. I missed out a lot of time while they were growing up, with the hours that I was working. I was working out of town, etc. And I refused to continue that lifestyle. And I know this is not my story and my story alone, as an estimated 70% of Americans are in the same boat. And this plague does not discriminate. It doesn't matter where you're located. It doesn't matter what your parents may have had. It seems to still take a hold of a lot of us. Um, as an example, I mean, when I start thinking about wealth and how money works, I realize looking at a lot of individuals, even celebrities, for instance, or professional athletes, they struggle the same way that we do. And we're not in the same position with that earning capacity. For example, Adrian Peterson, running back with a successful 15-year NFL career with teams like the Minnesota Vikings, New Orleans Saints, Washington Redskins, and most recently the Seattle Seahawks. And he earned over $100 million during his career. What I wouldn't give to earn that kind of money. But unfortunately, I am not a professional athlete. Um, However, he mismanaged his wealth. He lived lavishly, made poor investments, and ultimately that led him to bankruptcy after a Houston judge ordered that all of his assets be seized in 2024. If we are talking about outside of professional athletes, let's look at celebrities. Lindsay Lohan, as an example. Lindsay Lohan makes a lot of money making movies, yet the minute she stops doing one of the movies, she finds herself in a really hard predicament. Again, mismanaging her wealth, living lavishly, and making poor investments. And that's same thing goes for, I don't know how many of you are from the South, but T-Pain from Tallahassee, Florida, same situation. He didn't know what to do with his money. He went out and bought himself a Bentley way over market price and turned around and returned it a few months later and lost $400,000 on his investment. Not a wise investment at all. Um, I know that for me, I would consider professional athletes, celebrities, as people who are considered wealthy. But if you don't know what to do with your money, you're still poor. So, would you agree that most Americans do not understand how money works? I think that's a very good statement. If you agree, put an 8 in the chat. So the importance of financial literacy, if we look at how most of us grew up, we lived in the poverty language. Go to school, get good grades, get a good job. When you find a good job, keep it. Money is the root of all evil. Um, the rich are robbing the poor. Money doesn't buy any happiness. They don't pay much. The rich should pay more taxes. Things have gotten really expensive. Um, Whereas people who grew up with the wealth language were told, go to school, get good grades, start a business. A job is a good place to start, but not a good place to finish. It's called the corporate ladder, not the corporate bed. Money isn't everything, but it ranks right up there with oxygen. Money is best exchanged for experiences, not things. And don't work for money, teach your money to work for you. So, a little story about my childhood. I grew up in your typical middle working class family. We had enough to live on. We were able to go on vacations. As far as I knew, we were doing good. But I was brainwashed with the poverty language, which told me go to school, get a bachelor's degree, get a master's degree, find a good job and just work that good job for the rest of my life. When you start comparing the poverty language to the wealth language, there is one key difference, and that is mindset. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that mindset here. So either you're mastering money or money is mastering you. Me personally, I want to master my money. I want it to work for me. Financial control is a choice, and without it, the money you have or the amount of money you have is going to dictate what you can do with your life. So shifting our mindset from being a consumer in the economy to becoming an owner, you do that by becoming an investor. So let's talk about what is wealth. What is the definition of wealth? Well, wealth is the byproduct of money making money for you. So the only time you're going to realize that money grows on trees is when you realize money itself is the seed and the harvest. Mr. Suni Samad says that. Wise man. So again, I like to throw out these funny stories of money not growing on trees. Well, I grew up in Hawaii and we actually had a money tree in the backyard. It was called Pleomele hawaiiensis. And we used it as children to pay, quote unquote, play currency when we were playing store and house and whatever else. And so I grew up thinking money grew on trees. Obviously, that's not the case. So, what exactly is the wealth formula? Well, the wealth formula is time plus capital plus rate of return minus inflation minus taxes equals wealth. And how do you cultivate that money tree? By putting this into play. So why is this important? Can you work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year without calling in sick or complaining? Nope, me neither. But the typical person works 40 hours a week for about 40 years. And if we figure on an average salary of $50,000 a year, that's only $2 million. But what if you had exemplary employees like Andrew Jackson or Ulysses S. Grant or Benjamin Franklin who can work for you 24/7, 365? It could be possible to make that 2 million in considerably less years. Which would you find to be more valuable? 2 million earned over 40 years or 2 million earned over 20 years or less? I'll take the less time for sure. So time builds wealth. Allowing our money enough time for the interest to compound will build your wealth. So let's talk about Mr. Start Early and Mr. Start Late. Both are able to save $3,600 a year and can invest in a vehicle that earns them 8% interest. Well, Mr. Start Early is going to start immediately at age 25. Start saving his $300 a month at 8% interest. His $3,600 a year are the seeds, and the 8% interest is the soil. So as you can see, year 1 goes by, year 2 goes by, 3, 4. Of course, Mr. Start Late still hasn't started. He's still waiting to see what happens. Well, at age 31, Mr. Start Early has now $34,692. Mr. Start Late, he still hasn't started his investment. His vehicle is not rolling down the road just yet. So they run into each other around this time, and Mr. Start Late asks Mr. Start Early, hey, are you still investing your money in this 8% vehicle? And Mr. Start Early says, well, yeah, yeah, and it's doing really well. So Mr. Start Late goes, okay, well, I better jump on this before it's too late. So at age 32, you can see Mr. Start Early, he kind of stopped, but his money is still growing. Year after year after year, it's still growing. Mr. Start Late, who's starting at 32, starts investing. He's starting to grow his money tree finally. So year after year, he's putting his $3,600 in. The funny thing about this is you can see that at some point at age 48, they have about the same amount of money, about $130,000. However, Mr. Start Early only contributed a total of $25,200 to get to this $130,000. While Mr. Start Late had to invest money over a longer period of time and overall contributed $61,200 towards that. So who did a better job of investing their money? Definitely Mr. Start Early. He understood the wealth formula, and through the power of leveraging time and compound interest, his seeds continued to multiply year after year without having to supplement it any longer. So let's talk about rate of return and the rule of 72. The quality of your soil determines the quantity of your harvest. So the rule of 72 states that your investment will double every 72 years at 1%. So if you invest $10,000 at age 29, it's going to take 72 years for that to become $20,000. You're going to be 101 if you invest in a 1% vehicle. Now, if you invest in a 4% vehicle, your money is going to increase every 18 years. Why is that? Because it's at 4%. So we're going to see a return of investment at 65 of $40,000. Again, at 8%, we're at 160,000 at age 65, following that rule of 72. At 10%, our money will double every 7.2 years. So if I invest $10,000 at age 29, by the time I reach 65, I now have $320,000. So if the average American is retiring on a 401k or a 403b with $87,000, why do you think that is? Well, because most of us get into some kind of financial emergency at around age 29. We end up borrowing from our 401k. And the first time we do that, we really needed to do it. It was the only way we could find to get out of our financial emergency. However, the next time I get into financial trouble, it's so much easier to dip into that 401k. Before you know it, it becomes a habit, and our retirement fund becomes an emergency fund, leaving us little or no money for retirement. So therefore, we must be intentional on our wealth journey. Food for thought. Would you prefer to plant your money in a low quality 1% soil or a high quality 10% soil? I think we can all agree 10% is a lot better than 1%, and our money grows a lot faster. Correct. Now, I don't know how many of you were told in your teens or young adulthood that you needed to open both an interest-bearing checking account and savings account. I know I was. How many of you, if you were told that, put an 8 in the chat for me? Exactly. So I was told it was a safe place to grow my money. I opened my bank accounts and I put my money in there. And with every month that went by, I saw this tiny little increase in my money. Well, guess what the banks were doing with my money? They were buying bank-owned life insurance. And they weren't just using mine. They were taking yours and yours and yours, all of our money combined, and they were purchasing millions of dollars of life insurance. So let's look at this chart here. Bank of America currently holds $24 billion in cash value life insurance. Wells Fargo, 19 billion. JP Morgan, 12 billion. PNC, 10 billion. Truist Bank, 7 billion. So let's think about this for a second. My bank account that I was putting money in every single month, I was seeing typically 0.02% growth. Do you know what these banks were making using my money to purchase bank-owned life insurance? Well, the average over the last 20 years has been between 8 and 10%. So if a bank is getting 8 to 10% on $24 billion of your money, why are they only giving you 0.02%? That's a good question, right? So let's talk about how our money grows. What we were doing with our bank accounts, our checking and our savings accounts, our interest bearing, mind you, bank or savings account, was growing at this slow fixed rate, very typical of CDs and saving accounts. Very, very safe and predictable. Very slow growth. Let's talk about variable. Again, think stock market where things are going up, things are going down. There's a high potential for loss. So we're thinking stocks, mutual funds, granted, higher returns, but higher risk. So if I were to invest in a variable interest product, let's say I put $1,000 in there. If I lose 10% of that $1,000, I still have $900. But then if the stock market goes back up by 10%, I only regain $90 of my 100 that I've lost. So I only have $990, not the original 1,000 that I started with. So if you start thinking about this on a much larger scale, people investing millions of dollars, when the stock market dips by 10%, they lose a large chunk of money. That is not the kind of growth I want. Now, we've got this fabulous product down here on the end, the index strategy. So index universal life policy, indexed accounts of any kind. There is a zero floor. So for example, when the stock market goes up, my money goes up. When the market goes down, I don't lose anything. Zero floor. And that's because my money doesn't really participate in the market. It only mimics the market. So if I invest in an index strategy today, I'm going to look retroactively at what the market did exactly 1 year from now. And if the market did 10%, I get an interest credit that accounts for that gain. In the event that the market goes down below zero, I lose nothing, but I also gain nothing. My mind, zero is my hero. So the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is right now. And that's what we want to help people with, right? We want to ensure that if they haven't invested 20 years ago, that they're doing so now. So inflation, are prices going up or is the value of your dollar going down? Let's talk about this. First of all, what causes the value of a dollar to decrease? So we've got high inflation, right? We've got reduced purchasing power, where the price of goods and services rise, but each dollar buys fewer items, resulting in lowering of its value. We've got increased money supply, where the Federal Reserve increases the money supply faster than the economy is growing, and that ultimately results in a weaker currency. We've got lower interest rates, and that's because of a reduced investment demand. Global investors may move their capital to other currencies offering higher yields, and that subsequently decreases the demand for the dollar. We also have got large trade and budget deficits. We're importing more than we're exporting. That puts downward pressure on the dollar as well. Geopolitical and policy uncertainty. We know about this one right now because of our current president and his aggressive tariffs. This can slow our growth and lead investors to reassess the outlook of the economy, and that causes the dollar to ultimately decline. Or even institutional stability, threats to the independence of the Federal Reserve, or risks of government shutdowns, which we've dealt with quite a few recently. That can undermine global confidence and weaken the dollar's status as well. So for the last 10 years, the inflation rate's been 2.91%. So if the value of our dollar decreases annually on average 3%, we are losing money. Our money has to grow at a rate that supersedes the inflation rate. Otherwise, our dollar is losing value. So now let's talk about how our money is taxed. We've got the tax now bucket over here on the left-hand side, where we're talking about mutual funds, CDs, savings accounts. This is tax now. So we're getting after-tax money with taxed growth. So we're just going to be taxed and taxed and taxed. We've got this middle bucket. We've got our 401ks and our IRAs and our annuities and 403bs. This is before taxed money, and it's taxed when we withdraw. So we're going to get taxed later. And then we've got our bucket on the right. We've got our Roth IRAs and our life insurance. As it says, tax never. We used after-taxed money, and we have tax-free growth. So since our taxes are more likely to increase, shouldn't we pay our taxes now and put our money into a bucket that we don't have to pay taxes later when the taxes increase? If you agree with that statement, put an 8 in the chat for me. Excellent. So let's talk about the wealth strategy. Our greatest asset, or your greatest asset, is your ability to produce an income. Your second greatest asset is how well you can protect it. So how do I protect my income from the what ifs? What if I pass away tomorrow? Or I become critically ill and I can no longer produce income? Or what if I lived an extremely healthy life and I outlived my ability to produce more income? Life insurance as an investment tool? Yeah. By utilizing an indexed universal life product, we are able to protect ourselves from those what ifs. So, just to rehash again, what exactly is the wealth formula? Remember, time plus capital. Excuse me 1 second. I need to take a sip of water. Sorry about that. So remember, wealth formula, time plus capital plus rate of return minus taxes minus inflation equals wealth. So in the example here, an IUL is utilized as an investment account. We've got a time of 20 years. That is our funding period. We have our capital, $156 a month. We've got our rate of return. Right now, that's averaging between 6.42% and 15.88%. And the IUL is a tax advantaged growth. So, oops, excuse me about that. So if you remember back a few slides, we talked about 2.91% being our current inflation rate. Well, our rate of return is superseding that inflation rate. So we are going to grow our money. So according to IRS tax code 7702, money growing in the stock market that is attached to a genuine life insurance contract cannot be classified as gross income and therefore cannot be taxed. So unlike your 401k, which is a loan against your money, devoid of taxes and penalties. So unlike your 401k, which does tax you and has penalties when you use your money, the IUL is going to prevent that. We're not going to be paying taxes and penalties on that. And the average rate of return right now is 15%, according to the US Pacesetter. That's pretty amazing. That's a huge supersede of our inflation rates. So it's a great product to try and invest in to grow your wealth. So the wealth formula strategy, we've got compounding interest, point-to-point indexing, and we only participate in the gains and never the losses, right? The zero floor is my hero, or zero is my hero. So what exactly is compound interest? Well, compound interest is the interest earned on both the initial principal and the accumulated interest from previous periods. This effectively allows you to earn interest on interest. It causes savings or investments to grow at an accelerated rate over time rather than in a straight line. So we're going to see that upward motion. Point-to-point indexing is a fixed index annuity strategy, and that calculates interest based solely on the percentage change of an index. For example, the S&P 500. And it's usually between two specific dates, usually the start and end of a contract year. It ignores all the interim volatility and caps the gains while providing a zero floor to protect against market losses. So although we're no longer investing active income, our cash value continues to grow no matter what. So I don't know how many of you were around in 2008 and 2020. If you were in an index strategy, you wouldn't have gained anything, but you wouldn't have lost a penny. So what happened in those 2 years? Well, in 2008, we had the housing market crash. Anybody remember that? If you do, put an 8 in the chat. I remember it. I really remember it because I was a real estate agent at that time. And I witnessed firsthand the devastating effects of the marketing crash, which was triggered by the bursting of a massive housing bubble and fueled by subprime lending and loose credit standards, as well as complex financial products. As the adjustable rate mortgages reset and home prices fell, massive defaults led to foreclosure crisis, bank failures, and what they called the Great Recession. And that resulted in over $2 trillion in global economic loss. Hence, if you look at 2008 here, there was loss. But in an indexed universal life product, it would have been a zero floor. So there would have been no loss for you. Whereas those of us with 401ks, we probably lost a big chunk of money at that time. In 2020, COVID, severe global recession, predicted losses between 3.2 and 4.8 trillion dollars over 2 years. Looking at this chart again, you can see where we've got some impacts in here. Huge, negative 15.26% in 2022. That would have tanked my 401k. Matter of fact, it did tank my 401k. I lost a couple $100,000 in my very little 401k. It caused a lot of unemployment, massive supply chain disruptions, and intense inflationary pressures. And unfortunately, the crisis disproportionately affected the lower income workers, women, and small businesses, while increasing global poverty for the first time in a generation. That's pretty crazy. And that's all reflected right here in this chart. So if we were in an indexed product, we wouldn't have lost money, but we surely wouldn't have gained money. But I would have rather have kept what I had than to lose what, I had been saving. So that's always important to remember. So who's qualified to work with us? I mean, we're licensed professionals and we're qualified to work with anyone. We can customize a strategy that works for you. And we love to meet with our clients at least every 6 months to guide and coach them to their financial goals. So you set the pace. You get to select what is important to you, what you want to protect, and we will help you with that. Is there any questions? No? Well, the next steps today, I would encourage you, reach back out to the person that invited you and thank them. Let them know you're interested in our help or in the business opportunity. I mean, you could be doing exactly what we're doing, educating people on the reasons we want to grow our wealth and how to do it. And refer a friend. Don't keep this secret to yourself. All right. I hope everyone has a lovely night, and I hope you found this as important as I do. Good night, everyone.
Thank you.